Good morning. My name is Monika Nawrot, and this is Brett McGowan, and we are going to talk about some serverless solutions available on Google Cloud Platform. So we've been talking about serverless for a while, but let me remind you about main principles of serverless. The first one is infrastructure. That is kind of invisible for you as a developer. So infrastructure auto-scales, auto-heals, auto-updates, and it does automatically for you. And the second thing is that you don't pay for unused CPU cycles, or more broadly speaking about unused resources. Okay. So in Google Cloud Platform, you have quite a lot serverless solutions, serverless blocks that can be used to power your applications. And probably the oldest one and probably the first serverless solutions that was available was Google App Engine, which was launched around 2008 and is used to run your application in serverless paradigm. There are also several storage solutions like Cloud Storage, Cloud Data Store, and recently launched Firestore. The last one is pretty interesting because you don't pay for storage, but you just pay for throughput. So for all read and write operations. There is also Cloud PubSub. This is a Google messaging system. So for if you want to put a heavy load of messages, Cloud PubSub is responsible for delivery of these. And finally, there's Cloud Functions, which is available from around 2016. Many people divide serverless into two types. The first one is backend as a service, when you have very customized service that does a specific thing for you. Brett will be talking about that later on in the presentation. And there's also function as a service. So it allows you as a developer to write a few lines of code that will do something meaningful for your application. And I will talk about function as a service. In Google, we have a project called Cloud Functions. And this is a serverless environment for building and connecting cloud services. I would like to emphasize the word connecting, because often cloud functions can be used as a glue code. So imagine a situation when you are waiting for some data to appear in cloud storage, and then you have a function that is waiting for this data, and later on it runs a data flow to analyze this data. The other use cases are microservices. So you have these functions that are single purpose, very concise, that serve some kind of functionality, and you can bind these functions together and expose them under a single endpoint to your users. So speaking about triggering functions, we support, of course, HTTPS, which is probably the most common way of connecting applications. Thanks to that, you can, in example, connect your function to Google Assistant or Google Home, because they both support HTTPS. So we can go beyond Cloud Platform. We also support Cloud Storage, so we can just listen for changes in your storage bucket, for a file to appear or a file to be deleted. And there is Cloud PubSub, so the messaging system that I mentioned before. And finally, we have integration with Firebase. So we've had a bunch of different Firebase products. Also, Brett will talk about that later. So here you can see a small code snippet that should be very familiar to you. It's a hello world function that takes a request and returns a response. And you can deploy this function with a single command. And the great thing is that by launching this single command, you can make this function live, and you don't need any additional configuration. In particular, you are given for free fully qualified domain in cloudfunctions.net namespace. You can deploy a function from Cloud Console UI, so the UI that is common for all Google Cloud products. You can use G-Cloud, which is a command line tool for similar purpose. And finally, you can use API. Like there are several libraries generated based on the API, so probably whatever language you would like to use, there is a wrapper for the API. And actually, I was responsible for launching this API. So if you have like any comments, any ideas about the API, like you can talk to me after the talk. I would love to listen, like any feedback here from you. So now I will show a demo. The demo will look as follows. So there will be cloud storage bucket, and we'll be listening for event, which in this case will be an image being uploaded to the bucket. There will be a function waiting for the file to appear, and it will take this file and put it to Cloud Vision API. And what Cloud Vision API does, it applies like some labels, so it tries to recognize what is on the picture. There will be also another cloud function registered in the very same bucket. And what it will do is it will take the image and create a thumbnail and upload it to another place in cloud storage. So I will move to the demo. As you can see, there's a link to the demo, so if you like to see the code or maybe upload in your own cloud products, please do so. So let me start the demo. I hope you can hear me. Okay. So yes, these are the functions that I'm going to use. This is the bucket that the functions are listening to, and here is yet another bucket where the result will be uploaded. So this is the live demo, but to make it even more live, I will take a picture of myself. And let's see what Google will recognize. Oh, this is even better. Okay, let's try it. Okay, so we have a picture. So I'm putting it to the Google Cloud Storage. Okay, it's uploaded. So right now in the background, function should run, or even two functions. And this is the output folder. Yes, so you can see a result. There's a thumbnail. Indeed, there's a thumbnail. And let's see how my picture was labeled. Finger, and I wear purple in the background. Thumb, glasses, vision care product, sign language, nail. Well, I think Vision API concentrated on my fingers and my eyeglasses mainly. Okay, but yeah, it went pretty well. So now let's look at the console. An example, extract labels was used to recognize these labels. So you can see that there's some monitoring, so you can track invocation, execution time, and memory usage just in the console, in the details of a function. You have also several parameters that that function was deployed with, and you have also a shortcut to view logs. So let's try that. As you can see, there are logs just for that function. So you can see how much time did it take to execute a function, and you have like several properties associated with that function execution. Okay, so that was a demo. Okay, so this is what I've been talking about. So there's logging and monitoring. Cloud functions are integrated with Stackdriver monitoring. So we can use Stackdriver consoles to see the logs, to set up your own dashboard and alerts. You can also use G-Cloud. You can use REST API to query that data. A few words about execution environment. So at the moment, we support Node.js in version 6 on the Debian 8 image. We have also some libraries pre-installed, like ImageMagick. From a function, you can access ephemeral disk. And what's cool, you're auto-authorized to other cloud products, so we can use cloud APIs straight away. It's very easy. The other thing is that we support local development. There's open source emulator that allows you, an example, to debug your function. So let's recap and talk about a few cloud functions use cases, the most common one. The first one is webhooks. So in example, if you are a mobile developer and you are not that experienced with backend, it's very easy to have some connections with backend just by writing functions. API endpoints, so you can imagine an API where each method is backed by a cloud function. So data processing pipeline, like the one that I mentioned, that function is waiting for some data and then launch a data flow. Internet of Things, so obviously, all devices around us generate a lot of events, so we can hook function for them. Finally, we can react to some changes in cloud platform. In example, whenever a VM is created, we can send notifications. But like I said, there's endless ideas, endless problems that can be solved with cloud functions. So I'm sure that many of you can think about such use cases from your daily work. So this part was about cloud functions and functions as a service. Now I pass the mic.